Calling to order the Colerain Township Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Wednesday, July 24th, 2019. Welcome everyone to the Colerain Township Board of Zoning Appeals. We like to give a brief overview of the functions of the board as well as the process. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, see. If we could just stand really quickly and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's those bad nerves. Okay, now the explanation of procedures. The primary functions of BZA are quasi-judicial. We're authorized to hear appeals from the administrative interpretation of the zoning code, such as the administrative denial of a zoning permit, requests for zoning variances, requests for conditional uses, and requests for expansion or changes to non-conforming uses or buildings. The typical agenda for these meetings go as follows. Appeals will be heard first, then other business of the board will be conducted. You may stay upon conclusion of your appeal, but you are not required to. All who will testify today, we ask that you stand at the lectern, and everyone must be sworn in before testifying before the Board of Zoning Appeals. Anyone who, I'm sorry, I got there. Please be sure to give your name and your address for the record, and also all testimony is subject to cross-examination. You are permitted to present documents today during your presentation. All documents, photographs, and other physical evidence presented during the appeal will be accepted by the board unless withdrawn by the offeror or an objection is made as to the admissibility of the evidence offered. The chairperson will rule as to whether the evidence submitted will be accepted or rejected. The zoning administrator or staff members will present an overview of each case. They will then make a recommendation to the board as to the disposition of the case. The chairperson will then open the hearing to the appellant and to present his or her case. And at the conclusion of the appellant's presentation, the floor will be open to the public for those who wish to speak in agreement of the appeal first, and then those who are opposed to the appeal. At the conclusion of the appellant's presentation, the floor, after comments for and against the appeal, the chairperson will then close the public comment portion, and then each member of the board will address the appellant, staff, and as appropriate to those who are opposed. Once questions have been answered to the satisfaction of the board, the chairperson will ask for a motion to approve or deny the request. There may be discussions on whatever motion is made prior to the board's vote. The vote of the board members is final action of the Board of Zoning Appeals. As to housekeeping, we just ask that everyone be respectful of whomever is speaking. Civility is key here. Chairperson does have the right to excuse anyone who's being disruptive during this process. That being said, may we have a roll call?
Mr. Bartelt.
Here.
Mr. Hill.
Present.
Mr. Roberta. Mr. Reiniger. Ms. Wilson.
Present. See that we are, Mr. Roberto is not here today, so we're asking that Mr. Shupp be seated. All right. Will everyone who will be speaking today in an appeal please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before the Board of Zoning Appeals today? Please say I will. Thank you. We have two appeals this evening. Case numbers BZA 2019-004. Request for variances from sections 10.2.1 sub A sub 4 and 10.2.1 sub A sub 8 for an accessory structure, and BZA 2109-005, request for a conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast accommodations. We'll go, if there's no objection from anyone on the board, we'll go in order today, or from staff. Is that okay? Alrighty. So BZA 2019-004, does staff have a presentation?
Yes, we do. This is an appeal based on a denial for a zoning certificate for an accessory structure on Hubble Road. The address is 4182 Hubble Road. However, the location of the proposed structure is 4200 Hubble Road, which is a rather unusual circumstance, and I'll kind of explain that. Hubble's kind of at the very southern border of Colerain Township. The property is on a private drive. There's a series of, I believe, 3 houses kind of stacked back from Hubble Road. The county actually has a name assigned to that road, but we can't find that in too many of the maps. There's 2 properties involved under the same ownership. This shows the proposed location of the structure behind that 4200 building, but it is proposed to serve the building at 4180 Hubble. And that's the reason why it was turned down based on location. With that said, though, it is not necessarily ineligible to have one on that property at 4182 if it served that particular house. But since the application specifically said that the reason was to serve a house on a different property, that was a grounds for denial. The other grounds for denial was the floor area of the building. The floor area proposed is 1,320 square feet. The house that it serves is about 486 square feet, so the building is more than double the size of the footprint of the house. The house that it serves is it exceeds it by 388 square feet. It exceeds the size of the house that is on the same lot by 456 square feet. These are the applicant's drawings of what the building would look like. Floor plan for the building. This is the site plan that the applicant provided. It's obviously not to scale, but we do have the dimensions proposed for that building, and it would be at least 5 feet off the property line, which is acceptable. It meets the height requirements and other various requirements. The only issue at stake here is just the size of the building and its placement on an adjacent lot. This is the house at the 8200 Hubble Road. This is the primary resident of the applicant. And this is the house on the adjacent lot. They look very similar, probably built very similar time frame. This is a view from the private drive looking west, and the proposed building would basically be sort of in those trees in the background. This is the driveway off of the private drive that would go back to that road. In reviewing this, we find that the placement variance is substantial since proposed building is not on the same lot that it serves. The size variance requested is submitted since the proposed building is substantial, since the building exceeds the maximum size by 49%. Number 2, the granting of the variance would grant a consideration that's not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. Third, the property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without a variance. The property can reasonably be used as a single-family dwelling within the limits of the zoning regulations. Fourth, granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on neighboring property, but would create a precedent to allow for that should be larger accessory structures if requested by neighboring property owners. The approval and placement its size variance would not affect the delivery of government services. There's no unusual topographic site configuration issues related to the property which would prevent the reasonable application of the size and height regulations. And by taking into account the consideration the benefits to the applicant if the variances are granted as weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of neighborhood and broader communities, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by not granting the variances for the placement and additional size of the proposed storage garage. Staff's recommendation is for denial of this request. You will note that in your packet there is a justification letter from the property owner which states more a timing sequence for how he sees things playing out. And just as a note, if things do happen, like he is talking about, if he sells the house, let's see, I got this slide here to refer. If he sells the house at the 81, or, yeah, what is that, 8182, 4182. He would basically reconfigure the lot lines and add that building to the 4200 parcel. That would take care of that placement issue. The issue staff has is, well, if that can be done in the future, if you do it now, that solves one of the two code issues. Secondly, he says that he would add on to the house at some point in the future to the extent where the footprint would be equivalent to the proposed building. Again, in sequence, if he had already done this before applying for this building, there'd be no need for a variance. But on both of those situations, there is no way to condition a variance based on something that may or may not happen in the future. That's just, we have no leverage for making sure those particular things happen. There is an option if somebody, we talked about this with other accessory structures, if you physically attach it to the house, like to either house, the size issue goes away because it becomes a part of the footprint of the house. But we realize that for topography and various site configuration issues, it's a challenge. I wouldn't say it's impossible. But there are ways of probably achieving what he wants to achieve if the sequence is set up or if, say, he adds that space to the house itself. So there's ways of avoiding the variances. So that is our recommendation. Are there any questions about the proposal?
Does anyone on the board have any questions for staff at this time? Okay. Is the applicant present? If you could approach the podium. Do you have a presentation?
Not really. He basically
I'm
kind of
sorry.
said exactly what I'm doing.
Be sure to give your name and your address for
Okay,
the,
my name is Joe Daly, 4200 Hubble Road.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Daly. You may proceed.
Okay, so, yes, I live at 4200. The lady that lived next to me at 4182, and she moved into her home. The family approached me about buying part of a parcel that was right off of Hubble Road. And I told him at that time I wanted to possibly do an addition at our house. When we started measuring for setbacks and everything, I realized I needed to go up towards the 4182 a little bit more. So at that time, they didn't want to divide anything up. They just wanted to sell it as a whole. I didn't want the other house. I just wanted more property to do a possible addition on our house that we've been talking about doing for a while. So as he stated, I know it's not, normal circumstances, but at the end of the day, I think we own almost 5 acres back there now. And the plan, hopefully, is to get that building. And one of the reasons why that building, when I first started talking to him about the size requirements and the 900 to go to the 1200, the company that I was talking about getting numbers from, the numbers were not extravagant. The extravagantly more to build bigger. So I thought, okay, well, if I can go bigger, it'd be nice. And one of those reasons is when we go to do this addition, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I have that unit right there. I can save myself a lot of money from having to go use a storage unit or some sort of bin or something to haul all it, because it's going to be a pretty major remodel. We'd have to get everything out of our house. I'm thinking I can take everything right back to that, into the storage unit or the barn, whatever you want to call it. And while the remodel was going on, and then, and all part of this, and like he said, yeah, it'd be nice to just move the property line up right now, but we're trying to just kind of like bite off what we can chew right now without jumping. We like to think things out, me and my wife, and we're just trying to do a step-by-step process of what we can afford right now. And in the future, this is what, we're kind of hoping to do, plan to do. But that's, I guess, the extent of it.
Thank you. Thank you. You can have a seat at this time, but you may be asked to come back for any questions from the board. Is anyone present who would like to speak in support of the appeal? Is there anyone present who would like to speak in opposition? Sir, if you could approach the podium and give your name and address for the record.
How you doing?
Good.
My name is Jim Moore. My address is 4192. I live on the back of the lane.
Sworn in?
I'm sorry?
Were you sworn in?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, if you were going to speak, you'd have to be sworn in.
If you could just raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that everything you say before this board today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
You may proceed. It's okay. You can proceed.
I just didn't realize the procedure.
That's okay.
I'm a little against building a great big barn back there. I don't really want the neighborhood, it's a quiet residential neighborhood, to become a business district. I believe that's the purpose behind it, even though it wasn't stated. So, I understand the rules about building a barn bigger than your house. It's the zoning. A friend of mine lives in Colerain Township as well. And they couldn't build a barn because he wanted to build it bigger than his house. So, that's just what I wanted to say, it's a quiet neighborhood and a lot of woods back there, just trying to keep it the way it is.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here speaking in opposition of this appeal? Seeing none, may I have a motion to close the public portion of this?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
I have a motion and second, and may I have a roll call?
Mr. Bartoltz?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Shutt?
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye. Okay. Let's start with Mr. Reininger. Do you have any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Daly, if you'd come back up to the lectern, I'd appreciate that. I've really read carefully your justification for variance and looked again at our zoning regulations for accessory buildings. Overall, I think it's a premature request. If I looked at your justification for the variance, and I'll only pull out the words that you've written, it says, "We will eventually be moving property lines. If in the future we decide to sell, we are planning to do an addition. We will probably move the property lines and possibly future purchase of a larger tractor." We're not able to project what you might do. I can only work with what is actually physically available to us. Then we move to the second area where my concern is, and that is the size of the structure is not even within a margin, a close margin of the size of the principal house. The fact that the principal residence is not on the same property is something that could be worked out. It's not a bad proposal, but considering the size of the property and considering the amount of conjecture that has to fall into place for things to be reasonably executed, I have a difficult problem with that. And you said things you're planning, you want to do things sequentially, step by step. You and your wife want to plan things out, which is fine. I think what we're looking at tonight is probably the cart before the horse in some respect. If there's anything you wish to defend from my comments, you're welcome to do so, but that's pretty much, I hate to lecture you in public, but that's probably where I'm coming from.
So I guess my question is if I got it to the size that is allowed, square footage now, is it okay? You know, do I even have to go through, or obviously I have to resubmit everything and everything like that, but if I go and downsize it to the applicable size of 900 and something square feet, then am I okay with doing it? I was just trying to go bigger because the only reason I want to go bigger is because the price difference wasn't big enough.
We still have the obstacle that it's not on the same property that your primary residence is on. And that's another whole issue that, other than size, I mean, that has to be resolved.
Okay. But even though that I'm the owner of the other property right now, as long as I keep it in that.
I think it reads that it has to be subordinate site to the principal building. It has to be on the same site as your principal building, and your home is your principal building.
Okay.
So it has to be, you own it, but
Okay.
I think the way the property lines are configured, it's not on the same site for deed work or whatever.
Okay.
So you have some things to overcome, but other than that, sir, I have no other comments. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Reiniger. Mr. Shup, do you
Just
have?
a little clarification. If he were to build that building at the same footprint as the house at the 4182, which is on the same lot, that would be perfectly legitimate. He would not be able to state that it's specifically for the neighboring house. But if he just simply came in not state, and people usually don't state that it's for something not on the property in their application, they will just simply, apply for a building. So if he applied for that 4182 house at that square footage, there would be no need for a variance.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Shup, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I don't know if we have an answer, but apparently you have no timelines.
I've been speaking to an architect. We've been talking about this addition for probably 10 years. And then when that property became available within the last few, with my neighbor moving into a home and her family approaching me, that's when we started to realize, okay, now this can probably happen because we own the property next door, and that's the way we want the addition to go. But at where the property lines are right now, I can't do it. There's not enough room over there to stay with our setbacks, so that's why at that point, once we kind of start to get all the numbers together with the architect and figure out, okay, this is the best side to add on to with what you want to do, then at that point, in the construction loan and everything, we're going to pull enough money to, at that time, move, because I've talked to Abercrombie. They came over and they marked property lines for me, and I kind of got an idea on how much it'll cost in the future. He said just, and that number, he just said, just plan on, if you want to transfer, move the property line up and then put it onto the 4200 property, this is about how much you're going to have and all the documentation and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, I would love to do that now, but I thought, well, I don't want to necessarily do it until we get all of our final numbers from the addition and say, okay, this is definitely the side we want to go to, and then at that point, consolidate it all at that moment. And, like I said, I was just trying to get this thing done beforehand and kind of use it as a nice little, the extra that, the square footage, the amount of money that it was gonna cost is the amount of money it would save for me not having to get a rental unit while it's in full remodel. So that was kind of the thought process. I knew it wasn't traditional, and I think I was talking to Marty on the phone or something. I just said, I know this isn't normal, I know this isn't traditional, but figured give it a shot and see what happens.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shuck. Mr. Hill, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Not for the applicant. I have questions for staff. Marty, you indicated that if the structure would essentially be an accessory to the 4182 if he brought it down within the size of that building. The question I have is with regards to what's defined as your front, side, and rear yards, that structure would meet the yards?
Yeah, we take, on private drive situations, we take the orientation to the private drive as the front yard.
Okay,
So that would be in the rear yard.
okay. Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Bartold, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Yeah, it's curious. I circled the same questions or words, I should say, that Mr. Reininger brought up about future and planning, and so it's interesting we're thinking on the same page. And that's probably why I would also have concerns. But I'm still curious about the site plan that you submitted. So you're saying you physically are going to change the property lines behind 4182?
Yes, eventually.
But couldn't you just do, I mean, it doesn't cost a lot to consolidate or change property lines, I don't think.
No, it doesn't, but, in our, I don't know, grand thinking, again, like I said, we didn't even really want the second house at all. It just, they didn't want to divide it up, they just wanted to sell it all as is. As we're looking at that, we're also looking at that house, and that house is actually a better piece of property. So then we started thinking, okay, if we don't do the addition at our house, is it better to just do it on the 4182 house and then just leave everything as is and sell the 4200 house? So that's where, I know it's a lot of what ifs, can be's, possibilities, but, at the end of the day, I was just hoping that with me owning it all, I'm in somewhat control of what's going on, and I love where it's at. I love the privacy. As my neighbor said, I know that it's a private location. We bought it as a starter home, and I think I'm going to be carried out of there. I don't think we're leaving. So,
And it's not for any business purposes?
no, nope.
That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Bartold. I'm sorry. I'm getting tongue-tied today. I apologize to everyone. And does anyone have any follow-up questions for the applicant? So, Mr. Daly, I don't think I have as many questions as I just have commentary, because the board has essentially covered the questions that I was going to ask. It sounds like you're left with a few options here: either build a shed on your principal property that is the size or appropriate size for that structure on your property, your home on your property, or go ahead and, as Mr. Bartold stated, and you've admitted it doesn't cost exponential amount of money to just change the property lines. So it's basically boiling down to, why not just move the property line so that you can go forward with the additions onto the house, or demolish the house next door since you don't like it, and then be able to, or even build on to your structure right now. As as it's been stated today, you can avoid all of this by just building right onto your principal structure in your home. So, and at the end of the day, this board has historically consistently denied variances requests for large accessory buildings that exceed the size allotted by the zoning rules. And when it comes to a variation or variance, where, the qualification for that is some sort of hardship, and you don't have a hardship here. And if you were to in the future, it sounds like something that you would cause yourself versus something that's out of your control. So that's pretty much where I stand on it. And so if there's no further discussion, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'd like to, I think for me, the thing that I'm struggling with, again, just like you, is the self-imposed hardship. You know, I think that basically what you're doing is good, but it's kind of self-imposing.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
if you build the 900 square foot to match the 4182, then you can move forward with it and be done. I agree that we have historically not allowed accessory structures to go bigger than the house. That's kind of where I stand too.
Yeah, it was just a, you know, as I said, this is all a learning process for me. I just thought a little bit bigger, why not?
Right.
If it doesn't happen, I go to plan B. So,
Okay.
it's okay. I understand.
Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion for or against the appeal?
I'll move that we deny the request for variance.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We have a roll call, please.
Mr. Berthold,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Shupp,
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger,
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
Aye. And so the variance request has been denied, and we just wish you the best of luck and
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank
Like
you
a
for
good
coming.
plan ultimately.
Yeah. Good luck. Okay, next on the agenda, BZA 2019-005, request for a conditional use permit for bed and breakfast accommodations. Is the applicant here? I'm sorry. Does staff have a presentation?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit for bed and breakfast accommodations for the property located at 2734 Mellowbrook Court. We use the term bed and breakfast accommodations per our zoning resolution because what she really wants to do is short-term rental leasing with Airbnb. We just don't have any of that language represented in our zoning regulations at this time. So the property is located directly to the right of Colerain Avenue, right to the south of Ronald Reagan. To the left, you can see Groesbeck Park right there. Here's just an aerial shot of the property. The property itself is located on a cul-de-sac right off of Royal Heights Drive to the left right there. The applicant received a letter of violation for running this establishment on June 6th, and then she applied for the conditional use permit to go through the BZA on June 12th. She simply just didn't know she had to get a conditional use permit for her accommodations. The property itself is located, or is an R6, is zoned R6, and that is bed and breakfasts are permitted in an R6. They just need approval through you guys. The house was built in the 1950s and is approximately 1,400 square feet with a basement. According to the Hamilton County auditors, the house states that it's a 3-bedroom house, but the applicant plans to rent out 3 bedrooms, as this is going to be her primary residence. So that means just one room was converted to allow for extra accommodations. And as I said before, the applicant plans to make this her primary residence. Guests will be allowed to park in the driveway, and there will be no external changes to the exterior of the house except for basic landscaping. Here's just another aerial of the, or picture of the property. Staff finds that the use is conditional use permitted with approval by the Board of Zoning Appeals in the district where the subject lot is located. The use is in accordance with the objectives of the Colerain Avenue area in the Colerain Township Comp Plan and Zoning Resolution. The conditional use will not substantially and/or permanently injure the appropriate use of the neighboring properties if approved with reasonable restrictions to mitigate the more intensive use of the property, including noise, outdoor lighting, and parking. Otherwise, the use will serve the public convenience and welfare. The use will not create excessive requirements at the public cost for public facilities, and services will not be detrimental to the economic welfare of the community. So with all this Staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit following the conditions. One, that the property be the primary residence for the owner. Two, that no more than 3 bedrooms be rented for the bed and breakfast, Airbnb, short-term rental. 3, that 2 off-street parking spaces be provided on the property, so the driveway. 4, 1 ground-mounted sign could be allowed with a maximum area of 4 square feet and a height of 4 feet. 5, the length of stay for the bed and breakfast be no more than 14 consecutive days. And then lastly, that there be no otherwise change to the outward appearance of the property.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for staff at this time?
I do. How did staff come across this? Was there a formal complaint?
And
Was there a
then,
complaint filed?
and then our code enforcement officer went out there and said that they were running an Airbnb. So then we just sent them a letter by.
No, actually, he didn't see that there was any physical evidence outside. We went on the Airbnb website and found it.
But that was generated from a formal complaint from, from a neighbor, okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Will the applicant please approach the lectern? State your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Latoya Suggs. I live at 2734 Mellowbrook Court, Cincinnati, Ohio 45239.
Ms. Suggs, if you have anything that you would like to say on behalf of your application.
I mean, Jesse pretty much explained a lot about it. So far, my guests have not been unruly. They have not disrespected anyone. We have not had any police come out. There has been any issues. To my understanding, the complaint was because someone parked on the street right in front of my house. I didn't think anyone parking in a public space was an issue. So for someone to complain about that, I thought it was what I'm gonna call petty. But I mean, like I said, my guest has been really respectful of all of my neighbors. And I talked to all of my neighbors, so for someone to not even come to me for a concern, I thought that they should be able to. Like my door is open, like I live there. They can talk to me anytime. I do yard work like every Sunday, so they see me out there. I don't know why no one would tell me about this. So, and my house is clean. Like there's no mess, so it's not a horrible sight to the community. And just to add, I also talked about as far as the pros go, and I wrote a brief document that explained these things, that I basically think that this helps the community for the simple fact that people that are moving to Cincinnati, they become aware of Colerain Township. I've had guests say that they really like the area because it's very diverse. They love the fact that shopping is convenient. They really like it. And I've had a realtor talk to one of my guests because they were interested in getting a house over there. So for anything, it's making sure that we don't have any abandoned homes in the area. So for me, I see nothing but positive things coming out of this. And I do have rules and regulations in place for anyone to stay in my house. It is a smoke-free environment. There is no noise. They're not allowed to hang out in the front. I do have a deck in the back of the home. So if they do need to sit outside and smoke or drink or whatever the case may be, they do that outside of the home in the back on the deck. So it's on the property and it's not in the public eye of my neighbors. So there are rules in place.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? Okay. And as you probably observed, the staff will probably have a question for you. Well, actually, since you're, staff will probably have a question for you, so you'll just come back up to the podium. You can have a seat at this time. Is there anyone speaking in support of this application? Is there anyone present that would like to speak in opposition of the application? Seeing none, may we have a motion to close the public portion?
So moved.
Second.
That was Mr. Reiniger, right?
That was Mr. Reiniger first. I think.
Mr. Bartold?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Schupp?
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye. Mr. Hill, we can start with you if you've got any questions for the applicant.
Yes. Do you have enough room to park at least 2 vehicles in your driveway?
Yes, I have enough room to park 3 vehicles in my driveway.
Perfect.
So if the street parking is utilized, it's more than likely, you know, I'm there, or I don't want my guests to have to like maneuver cars around, so I'll have 2 in the driveway and then 1 park on the street.
And I don't know if you know the answer to this one. Are there any no parking signs listed on the public street in which you live?
No, so it is a cul-de-sac, so, and they did all this construction, so there was initially a sign there saying that it's like a fire zone, but that's in the actual curve. So in front of my home is actually a parking spot.
Okay.
So it's no violations to park in that area, but that sign still isn't up, so technically if someone parked in the curb, I guess it wouldn't be like illegal, but technically there was one at one point, and no one parks in the curb.
Okay. No further questions for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Mr. Bartold?
Not necessarily. I was just reading that 7.4.3C about parking. It says there shall be a minimum of 2 parking spaces for the owner of the property, and an additional parking space for each guest room. So that would be 5 spaces are needed, 2 on the property, but all others could be on the street.
Correct. It does allow for using on-street parking as that
Yeah.
parking requirement.
And you said the driveway holds 3?
3 cars.
Okay, so
It meets
at the most
minimum.
2 would be on the street. If you were totally, are you typically full or not always?
There has been times where I was, so at minimum, there'll be 3 guests at the home.
I guess no other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bartold. Mr. Reininger, do you have any questions?
Just a quick one. Do you have any signage, or do you plan any signage for your property, for your business?
I don't, because, I mean, I don't really look at it as a business, and I haven't been up until this point. As I spoke to Jesse about, my goal is to basically get a roommate. And I love the fact that I can use Airbnb as a vetting tool, because, you know, everybody has their style of living. You know, some people are not clean, or they may be loud. So if I'm able to put you through Airbnb, which protects me as a homeowner, because they do have certain insurances that I am able to utilize if someone rents through that program or whatever. So if I get actual roommates, then I wouldn't be even using the site that, you know, whoever went on there to look to know that I was using it. It wouldn't be on there. So I don't know if you would look at as having roommates as a business, but I don't think that it is classified as that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reininger. Mr. Shupp?
None?
Okay, so, Ms. Suggs, we actually had an issue like this come before us before, so it's not a new thing. And I'm just wondering, because I did want to know about the sign, but you already answered that question. And you kind of answered Mr. Bartold's question with regard to how full you are. How often are you renting at this point?
It's quite often, actually. I mean, there's a lot of people that come to Cincinnati for business, travel, whatever the case may be. Maybe they're here because they're taking some, I had a girl here who was working on her master's, doing her doctorates, and she had to work at a hospital or something. So she was here for her stay for school. So it just really depends on the reason that they're here. But most of the time, let's see, I want to say about 90% of the time, maybe 80%. I'll say 80% of the time I am booked. Most people extend their stays. I mean, I have people who maybe they're in transition of getting a home, and then their lease is over with their apartment, so they have to stay somewhere until they can move into their home. So it may be like one person moved in, but they extend their stay, so someone's there, but a new person doesn't come all the time. So I don't know if that really answers your question. But.
Yes, no, you answered my question. And what type of screening does the Airbnb have at this time with regard to your guests?
Well, I know that they provide certain verifications. And I've used Airbnb before. I used to live abroad in China, and every time I would travel, whether it's Japan or whatever case may be, I loved using Airbnb because I knew that the people that I was staying with, they were approved. You can also read reviews. So if some guest was unruly, then I can read these reviews from someone else in the past. So I only allow certain people to stay with me. You already have to have at least 5 reviews, or maybe even 2. Sometimes I don't allow locals, only because, you have family here, and I'm not trying to have all those people at my house. It comes with too many issues. So it's a lot of things, factors that I look at to even do the vetting myself. But as far as Airbnb go, they allow the reviews on there. That's one, and that's a great tool for the renter as well as the guest. They also have verification, so I can submit my driver's license or just an email address or a telephone number. Personally, I only like to rent to people who have like a driver's license on file, because that way I know that the address that they have on there, it's really where they say they're from, and the information that's on their driver's license is really who they are. And I believe there was a background check. I'm not sure. I'm not going to speak on that because I'm not 100% sure if there is a background check that's done.
Okay, thank you. And just one last, two questions. Actually, no, it's the same question. So, no, 2 questions. Have you read over or do you understand or have any questions about the requirements that staff is recommending? Are you able to meet those requirements?
Yeah, I mean, when I first read it, I'm like, oh, I actually meet the bare minimum as far as the parking goes. And I got quite lucky because I do have like one of the largest parking lots on my street. So I understand, and I do meet the conditions.
Okay, and one reason why I asked that question was just because you had mentioned that some people sometimes want to extend their stay, and so just making sure that 14 consecutive days, that part was, well understood, and you're present while they're in the home.
Yes,
right. Okay.
Yeah, that's my primary residence. My water's in my name, all of my utilities. That's my only place of residence. So.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Mr. Barker?
Well, when you mentioned the student going to school, so she was there more than 14 days?
No, how long was her? No, it wasn't while she was in school. She was doing like an apprenticeship or something where she had to drive. So it was like 2 different stays. She came here. She had to leave for an interview in Michigan. It was weird because she actually drove back down here, and then she had to take some more, like go to work at a hospital or something. So she left, but she came back. So she extended her stay, but it wasn't consecutive.
Okay.
I had an additional question.
Mr. Hill?
The auditor's site says your house has 3 bedrooms, and I looked at the picture, and it looked like you had egress and ingress on that lower level, which would be the basement, I guess. Has that been converted into another bedroom?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what he was mentioning, that
Okay.
it's getting converted.
And how many bathrooms?
2.
Okay.
Yes, 2 full bathrooms.
Okay.
One on the main level and one down in the basement.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Just one, if I may, and perhaps it's been clarified, the 14-day limit is part of the staff request. Is that an impairment that you can live within, or is that going to present some unique problems? 14 days that a resident may stay there?
Can you clarify?
You may have answered it, the one student that was doing her postgraduate work. That's usually a semester, which is going to be way longer than.
Well, it was just an apprenticeship. So it was for school. She was getting credit working at this hospital, but she didn't have to stay for like a school period, like a whole quarter or anything like that. Yeah.
I guess that's, more of, is it Airbnb, or is at that point, is that a roommate? I guess that's kind of splitting hairs.
And that was the reason why when you guys said considering it as an Airbnb, I didn't look at it as that because, like I said, my ultimate goal is to get roommates at some point. It's a vetting process. So going through the site, if people want to extend their stay and eventually like maybe want to live there, then that's fine with me. So I don't know. I guess I would have to ask you guys, like, when can I turn this off?
Well, I would think that if you're using the Airbnb site, as long as you're using that, then that you would have to fall under that 14-day. But if you found a roommate or somebody that you said, okay, you've been here 10 days, this is working out great, you want to move in, then you take your listing off of the site, and then at that point, it's 2 roommates living in a house. That's how I would see it, but I guess you would have to ask staff if they concur with that.
And to echo those sentiments, if that neighbor were to have an issue with it, then you would probably just want to cover yourself by having an actual lease written out. It doesn't have to be anything fancy.
Right.
But, just to say, no, this is my roommate, this isn't Airbnb.
Right, okay.
That would be my
Yeah,
suggestion.
and it's like, for a site, a website, just to determine what something isn't reality, because like I said, I'm even on renters.com, and renters.com is another website, so would somebody else go on renters.com and say, well, this is what I'm doing, and someone on Airbnb say, this is what she's doing? So I just kind of feel like you can't justify what you think is going on because of some website, and I actually send people from renters.com to Airbnb because, like I said, it's a way to vet people to see, like, do I even want to live with you? Because if I have someone sign a lease today for a year or 6 months, well, I have to honor that. And they'll have to be there for that 6 months to a year or whatnot. I want to see, like, can we even live together? Are you respectful, of my property? Because that's my home. Like, I've worked hard to get that home. So I don't want anybody to disrespect it, or my property at that.
I understand. Does any further comments or questions? Would anyone like to make a motion to approve or deny the application?
I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're not even at that point, huh? I'm sleepy today, I apologize. The motion's been made to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
Didn't we do that already?
Did we?
I thought we
Yeah, we
did that.
closed it. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
have it
Oh, I apologize.
Okay.
Um,
Got me thinking I'm losing it over here.
The, I guess in terms of discussion before the motion, I don't really see any issues with this. It sounds like the applicant is present. She's going to monitor and make sure that people aren't being loud, abrupt, or making their neighbors mad with the noise levels. She seems like she cares about her property. She cares about the community. She's meeting the requirements. There is going to be some self-policing, and then, I guess if staff gets complaints about people staying there longer, they would have to investigate, but I'm not too concerned about that.
Yeah, I echo Mr. Hill's sentiments. I think you've made a wonderful argument for your case today. And so whenever the motion is made, I don't have a problem supporting it. Supporting approval of your motion.
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to staff's requirements.
Second.
Motion second. May we have a roll call?
Mr. Bartalt,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Shupp,
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger,
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
Aye. Your request has been approved. Thank you for coming in. So the next item on the list is unfinished business. We don't have any. Has everyone had an opportunity to read the minutes for June 26, 2019? Are there any edits, additions? I don't have any issues. May we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Second.
May a roll call, please?
Mr. Bartalt,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yeah, or abstain, I was not present.
Mr. Shupp,
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger,
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
Aye. Our next meeting is August 28th, 2019. Do we have any cases?
Got 4 cases.
4 cases. Lovely. And we see we have no administrative matters pressing unless staff has anything that they'd like to discuss. All righty. If nothing further, may we have a motion to adjourn today?
So moved.
Second? Anyone second?
Second.
Oh, Mr. Reiniger, second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bartalt,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Shupp,
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger,
Aye.
Ms. Wilson.
Aye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.